began with the campaign for fair food with the Taco Bell boycott.
Estábamos completamente solos.
We were completely alone.
Empezamos ahí a hablar con estudiantes, con gente de fe en todo el país.
But we began to reach out to students and to churches all across the country.
4 años más tarde, más de 300 universidades en este país estaban organizando en solidaridad con los trabajadores de Immokalee.
But 4 years later, 300 schools and universities had Taco Bell campaigns going on in solidarity with farm workers.
22 contratos de Taco Bell habían sido clausurados o habían sido prevenidos de establecerse en diferentes universidades de las más importantes.
And 22 colleges and universities actually cut their contracts with Taco Bell or got them off their campuses because of Taco Bell's refusal to improve conditions for farm workers.
El Consejo Nacional de Iglesias, que representa más de 50 millones de gente de fe, también estaba transmitiendo esta información.
And national religious bodies, including the National Council of Churches and the U.S. Catholic bishops, were also in support of this campaign and contacted Taco Bell.
Y al final se logró al primer acuerdo, se logró establecer el primer acuerdo.
And at the end of all of this, Taco Bell agreed, and that was our first agreement.
Ese fue el primer paso y el más importante.
And that was the first step.
Como estudiantes, como consumidores en este país, creo que hay muchas cosas en común con los trabajadores de Immokalee.
And so we see that actually students have a lot in common with farm workers in Immokalee.
Los estudiantes son jóvenes. En Immokalee las edades de los trabajadores van de entre los 15 a los 30 años de edad en promedio.
So we're both young. Most farm workers in Immokalee are between 15 and 30 years old.
La diferencia es que muchos de nosotros tuvimos que dejar los libros para tomar herramientas desde muy chicos, muchos desde niños, para empezar a trabajar, a producir la comida.
The difference is that many of us had to leave our books at very young ages to go and work with tools and to work in the fields to support our families.
Entonces, creemos que como trabajadores, mientras ponemos la comida en la mesa de esta nación, tenemos derecho también a tener abundancia de comida en la nuestra.
And we think that as farm workers, as people who pick the food that is eaten all across the country, that we also have a right to be able to afford enough food to feed our families.
Estamos cansados de que en Immokalee, en mi comunidad, se formen filas cada vez que se llega el tiempo de Thanksgiving. Miles de trabajadores haciendo fila para recibir pavo gratis.
We're tired of the fact that, for instance, on Thanksgiving, workers have to form very long lines to wait to get a free piece of turkey.
Estamos cansados de que el mundo nos vea con tristeza o con lástima.
We're tired of the world looking at us with pity or with charity.
Queremos que el mundo reconozca que esta es una lucha por la dignidad humana, es una lucha por el establecimiento de la justicia.
And we want people to recognize that we have human dignity and that our struggle is one for the dignity of all farm workers in the fields.
Esto no se trata de ayudar a los trabajadores pobres de Immokalee.
And this is not something that's about helping poor farm workers in Immokalee.
Esto se trata de entender que todos somos responsables porque todos nos beneficiamos del trabajo de los trabajadores.
This is about understanding that this is something that affects us all and that we're all in this together because all of us eat the food that farm workers pick.
Lo que estamos buscando son compañeros, son alianzas.
And so what we're looking for are compañeros or partners in the struggle.
Porque mientras eso no suceda, casos de esclavitud van a seguir existiendo.
Because unless we do something, more and more slavery cases will keep appearing.
El último caso involucraba a trabajadores amarrados con cadenas dentro de troques de U-Haul.
The most recent slavery case involved farm workers who were actually beaten and chained and locked inside of the back of U-Haul trucks.
Golpeados constantemente,
Constantly beaten,
amenazados de muerte.
threatened that they would be killed.
No solo ellos, pero sus familias también.
And not just them, but that their families as well.
Eran llevados a trabajar en algunas de las compañías productoras de tomate más importantes de la Florida.
And these enslaved workers were taken every day to pick tomatoes at two of Florida's largest tomato farms.
Entre ellas se encuentra Six Sales, se encuentra también Pacific.
And one of these tomato farms is Six L's and the other one is named Pacific.
Y hace un rato fuimos a una tienda, se llama, ¿sí conocen, no?
And so earlier this afternoon we went to a store, we went to Giant,
Y encontramos esto,
and we found this.
los tomates de esas mismas compañías que hace no mucho tiempo estaban ocupando a trabajadores, en este último caso, uno de los casos más brutales de esclavitud que ha ocurrido.
Tomatoes from 6Ls, one of the companies that not very long ago, less than 2 years ago, was using enslaved workers to pick their tomatoes.
Eso tiene que parar.
And that's something that has to stop.
Eso es lo que ha sido negocios como de costumbre,
Because this is just business as usual.
donde todo el mundo puede usar su poder para presionar, causando esta miseria en la vida de los trabajadores.
Where farm workers continue to live in misery.
Nosotros tenemos ahorita ya acuerdos con 3 ranchos, como ya había mencionado. Es un paso importante, pero no es la meta final.
And so as I mentioned earlier, we now have agreements with 3 tomato growers that are working with us. And it's an important step forward, but it's definitely not the end.
Todavía en la mayoría de las compañías existen las condiciones normales, que son miserables.
Still, in the majority of companies, sweatshop conditions continue to exist.
Y mientras esas condiciones no se eliminan, más casos de esclavitud van a seguir apareciendo.
And this is what allows more and more slavery cases to continue to exist, and they will be found.
El sueño que tenemos es que un día la comida se produzca en una manera digna.
But our dream is that one day, the food in this country will be produced by people who are treated with dignity.
Pero para lograr eso se necesita la participación de todos.
But in order to do this, this is something that we need all of you to help us with.
Se ha dicho por ahí que no se puede escoger ser inmóvil dentro de un tren en movimiento.
Someone once said you can't be neutral on a moving train,
Esto es nuestro tren.
and this is our train.
No se puede escoger ser inmóvil en frente de tanto abuso.
And you can't really choose to be neutral when you're part of such a system with so many abuses in it.
Nosotros regresamos a Immokalee mañana,
And we will be going back to Immokalee tomorrow,
de regreso a esta realidad.
and we'll be returning to this reality.
Esperamos que ustedes que se quedan aquí puedan tomar la antorcha y llevar la lucha de los trabajadores de Immokalee en la manera que puedan para crear presión en contra de Giant y en contra de otros grandes compradores que quieren seguir manteniendo el status quo.
But we hope that those of you who are here can become part of our campaign and continue it forward, working to call on Giant and other supermarkets to join us in improving conditions for farm workers.
Y sabemos que un día va a llegar ese momento en el que por fin nadie va a tener que sentirse avergonzado de trabajar en los campos.
And so we hope that one day the moment will then come where nobody will be ashamed of working in the fields.
Y nadie va a tener la vergüenza de comer y sentarse a la mesa con su familia, de probar los frutos de la esclavitud que hoy sigue ocurriendo.
And no one should be ashamed to have to go into the store and buy tomatoes or eat them with their families and worry that they might be coming from farm workers who were mistreated or enslaved.
Porque esa realidad la vamos a cambiar,
Because together we're going to change that reality,
todos juntos.
all working together.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Some questions?
Sí, sí.
Questions? Remarks, comments?
Please give me the particulars about Giant. My wife shops there every Thursday. This Thursday, I'd like to send a letter with her. You're saying that they buy, what do you call that kind of tomato?
Este se llama cherry.
Cherry tomatoes?
But the thing is, they probably, cherry tomatoes are the ones that are labeled,
Okay.
but they probably, you know, the
Compran de
other,
todo.
yeah, the other tomatoes, they don't have a label on them. Most tomatoes don't actually have a label. So
Okay.
that, you know, that we know they buy from 6Ls, they probably get all types.
How do you spell 6Ls?
6 como el número.
The number 6, S-I-X.
Yeah.
L.
L apostrophe S? And where is 6Ls in Florida, the location?
Tienen territorio en todo el estado y por toda la costa este,
They
hasta
actually have,
cerca de Virginia.
they have farms throughout all of Florida and up and down the East Coast.
Okay, and what is it that they refuse to do, or are they beating your workers?
En los casos de esclavitud, todas las compañías, antes de que hubiera acuerdos con los 3 ranchos, todas las compañías se han lavado las manos, diciendo no es nuestro problema. es problema de los contratistas.
So what happens is when there's a slavery prosecution, many times the companies always say that it's not their fault, that they wring their hands of it. Oh, it was just the contractors who were doing this to the workers.
Pero la realidad es que la compañía no está haciendo nada para garantizar que el trato dentro del rancho es un trato digno. Entonces están permitiendo que estas condiciones existan en su propiedad, porque nunca hay consecuencia para ellos.
But the reality is that these companies are allowing these abuses to happen because they don't do anything to ensure fair conditions, and they also never have consequences when there are abuses like this.
So the CIW would like to sign an agreement with them, would like 6Ls to sign an agreement with CIW, is that it? Is that what I should ask for?
Queremos que todas las compañías estén de acuerdo a trabajar con nosotros.
Yes, we're asking all the companies to work with us. One of the things to understand, so 6Ls is a tomato supplier. What we're asking Giant to do is 3 things. And there's 3 things that we've asked of all the companies that were mentioned. The first is that they pay a penny more per pound of tomatoes. And so this tomato bucket here that we showed, it weighs 32 pounds and when it's filled with tomatoes. And that is worth, as we mentioned, 40 to 45 cents. And so if Giant were to pay a penny more per pound of tomatoes, what would that make this bucket be? Penny more per pound, how many pounds are there?
32.
32? Which 45 plus 32?
Parece que tiene problemas con matemáticas. No vamos a decirle a nadie.
I don't tell anybody that math is not your strength. But it would basically raise the bucket rate from 45 cents to 77 cents, which is a huge increase. It's not where it would be for inflation from 30 years ago, but it is a substantial increase in terms of workers being able to survive. So that's the first thing, is the penny more per pound. The second piece is to have a code of conduct for fair conditions in the fields, and that includes 0 tolerance for modern day slavery. And so the code of conduct basically covered a lot of things. For instance, no sexual harassment, that's another very common thing that happens to women farm workers. No violence against people, verbal abuse. The code of conduct also includes a farm worker safety committee, because farm workers are often forced to work right after they've sprayed pesticides, which is very, very dangerous, and you're not actually supposed to do that. And so this committee that's now being implemented at the 3 farms who work with us actually gives farm workers on that committee the right to decide when it's safe and when it's not safe to work, so that right when they spray, people don't have to go into the fields. And then the most important part of the code of conduct is the 0 tolerance for slavery. So what that means is that if there is a slavery case, which obviously shouldn't be happening, that Giant would then no longer buy tomatoes from that company. Because what we've seen is that slavery cases happen, the immediate person who is beating the worker, but is sort of a middleman, goes to jail. Everybody else just continues on with their lives and continue selling tomatoes, continue doing well. And so what happened in the most recent case, it was the first time that we had some codes of conduct in place, and it was the first repercussions ever in terms of a company losing business for having a slavery case. So Whole Foods actually used to buy tomatoes from the farms where these enslaved workers were taken to work, and because they had now signed an agreement with us, they stopped. And that sent a strong message to those companies that, hey, you can't do this anymore. It's not going to be tolerated. Maybe you should change your mind and start treating workers better. But Whole Foods is a small buyer of tomatoes, and we have 7 companies, but there's a lot more. And so while the companies that are working with us, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, and all of them, are stopping to buy from the companies where the slavery case is, Publix in Florida, Giant here, and a lot of other supermarkets continue to buy from them, essentially saying, hey, it's fine. We don't care if you have a slavery case. We're going to keep buying. We're not even going to say anything to you about it. So the code of conduct is really important. And then the third piece is that there be a voice for farm workers in all of this, because who is actually going to know if they're getting the penny per pound and if conditions are improving? The farm workers themselves. And so they have a really important role in enforcing all of this. So that's what we're asking Giant to do. It is written in the letter too, if they want to see it. And a lot of McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, they've done it, so it can be done. And now we have a clear alternative because of all the work that Taco Bell, McDonald's, and Yumbrins have done. There are 3 farms, and they're not just 3 farms, but these farms, have land across the state. They're huge agribusiness companies. They're 3 major tomato suppliers who are implementing the code of conduct, who are passing this penny per pound on to workers, and who would be perfectly happy to sell to Giant if they would want to support, companies that are doing the right thing. So that's sort of the idea, is to stop supporting companies that abuse workers and shift to the ones that do the right thing.
Have you thought about approaching dining services at colleges and universities to stop patronizing food services that do not buy tomatoes from?
De hecho, hay ahorita campañas que están enfocándose en Aramark y Sodexo, que son dos de los más importantes proveedores de comida dentro de universidades y otras instituciones.
Actually, right now, two of our main campaigns are focused on Aramark and Sodexo, which are major food service companies at universities.
Y no sé si saben dónde está Aramark,
I don't know if any of you know where Aramark is headquartered.
¿no?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia.
Ajá. Entonces está básicamente aquí en su, ¿cómo se dice? En su yarda.
So it's basically here in your backyard.
Entonces hay muchas cosas que se pueden hacer ahorita por parte de la Alianza de Estudiantes y Trabajadores, se llama SFA. Existe esta campaña enfocándose en estos dos, en Aramark y Sodexo.
And so there are a lot of different things that people can do. The Student Farm Worker Alliance has students across the country working on the Aramark and Sodexo campaign, especially where there are contracts with Aramark and Sodexo.
Y también, otra vez, dentro de las universidades ahora ya hay una alternativa, porque Compass es uno de los más grandes, el más grande proveedor de comida que existe. Y ellos están trabajando con la coalición, igual que Bon Appetit, que no es tan grande, pero también está implementando estos mismos acuerdos.
And the good news is there is an alternative, because 2 of the 7 corporations that are working with us are Compass Group and Bon Appetit. And Compass Group is actually one of the country's largest food service providers. And so they also do universities and other places, as well as Bon Appetit, which is smaller. But so schools have the opportunity to pick a company like Compass Group.
I'm just curious, which companies would you say have been more eager to work with you, or which companies have been difficult to work with, just as a concerned shopper?
Bueno, todas las compañías que tienen acuerdo, ha sido básicamente una negociación. El acuerdo en sí es un acuerdo firmado que no se puede violar, que se puede llevar a corte si es que es violado.
So all the 7 companies that are now working with us, it's definitely been a process and a negotiation to get to that point. And now there are signed, legal documents where they've agreed to certain things that, if they violate them, that would be an issue in the courts.
Pero igual hay compañías que están más proactivas. Podríamos decir que Compass es uno de los más proactivos, igual que Bon Appetit y Whole Foods.
And some of these companies were more proactive than others. Compass Group and Bon Appetit were actually 2 of the most proactive companies.
Pero poco a poco, la cuestión es que las corporaciones que firman los acuerdos por primera vez tienen la oportunidad de reconocer la humanidad de los trabajadores.
And it's step by step, and each corporation that signs these agreements is essentially saying that they do recognize the dignity of the farm workers who pick their tomatoes and that they do deserve fair conditions. But the ones, does everybody get the companies that have reached agreements? There's Taco Bell, which is part of Yum Brands, and Yum Brands also owns Pizza Hut and Kentucky Fried Chicken. And then there's McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Whole Foods, and then Compass Group and Bon Appetit. Whole Foods is the only supermarket so far, and so that's one of our main focuses right now, is getting other supermarkets to do this.
Subway as well?
Subway.
Yeah.
Yep.
So besides being more selective, I guess, with our shopping preferences, what else can we do, like, here on campus too?
Tenemos algunas cartas que estamos pidiendo que todo el mundo, estudiantes, gente de la comunidad, lleve a las tiendas, a los supermercados. Y por aquí vamos a pasar unas. Eso es algo que se puede hacer y se puede hablar con los managers. En este caso de Giant, como ya se mostró por aquí, están haciendo negocio con esta compañía y eso tiene que parar. Tienen no solamente que cortar su compra con ellos, pero trabajar con la coalición para implementar un acuerdo.
So there's a lot that you can do, especially because Giant is right in this area, and we have letters up here that you can take to the manager. And we really encourage people to go in and talk with the manager, you know, if you're shopping there or if you're just going there, to let them know that you are concerned about this, and so they see that local people are concerned about this. So you can take those letters and bring it to them. And especially with Giant, because as we've seen, they're purchasing from 6Ls where the slavery case happened. And so, you know, one thing would be cutting the contract, but really what we want them to do is to work with us to improve the conditions and to become part of the agreement so that they can, you know, get towards sourcing their tomatoes in a more fair way. Another thing I'll pass out is a list if you're interested in signing up for updates, because often as the campaigns change, there's sometimes daily actions where we might ask everybody, you know, call in. Actually, not too long ago, everyone was supposed to call like Aramark headquarters, and so they got a lot of calls from people and things like that. So if you're interested in signing up for that, you can just put your name in your email here. But with the manager letters, you know, one thing that's good is taking the letter and talking with the manager, but also depending on how Giant responds, you know, it may be in the future like doing pickets or passing out flyers or something that's also been very effective. These postcards here are also, you can send them straight to Giant headquarters, and Giant's actually owned by a company called Ahold, which is based in the Netherlands, and they actually own Giant. And then they own another Giant that's down near DC that has a different logo. And then they own Stop and Shop, and then they own Martin's, and then they own a store in Virginia called U-Crops. So they're actually pretty big. And what we found is, you know, companies like Ahold, they don't just, it's not like each Giant buys its tomatoes. You know, Ahold negotiates deals for all of those different supermarkets. And so their purchasing power is pretty large. And so you can write them a letter to their headquarters, and the address is down here, and you can sign this, but it'd be even better if you wrote your own letter and then maybe got other people to sign this. And they do keep the letters. Like Taco Bell actually told us when we signed the agreement with them that they had like a whole room full of the postcards and the letters. So it's not as if, you know, they're not just gonna like throw it away. It is correspondence from their consumers. So that's also really important. And there's more materials up here too if people want more information. And the website also has a lot of articles. And there's also a group, the last thing in Philadelphia, that is doing a lot with Aramark. They've been doing delegations to the Aramark headquarters to try to talk with them. So.
La otra cosa es que si uno quiere también, para todos aquellos que quieren hacer algo un poco más spicy, por decir.
So if you want to do something very spicy.
En la Florida tenemos ahorita la campaña contra Publix. Es un supermercado muy fuerte, uno de los que está creciendo más rápido, de hecho.
And so in Florida right now, our campaign is focused on Publix, which is actually one of the fastest growing supermarkets in the country.
Cuando a Publix le preguntaron sobre el caso de esclavitud y qué pensaban sobre eso,
so when they asked Publix what they thought of the slavery case that happened in the fields of one of their tomato suppliers,
básicamente la respuesta fue, bueno, la cadena sí compra tomates de estas compañías, refiriéndose a las compañías involucradas o manchadas con el último caso de esclavitud.
Publix's response was, yes, we do buy tomatoes from the farms where the most recent slavery case happened.
Pero estamos pagando el precio justo de mercado.
But we're paying a fair market price.
Entonces nosotros nos preguntamos, ¿qué es eso? ¿Qué es un precio justo de mercado cuando los trabajadores están siendo brutalizados en esa manera?
But we ask ourselves, how can anything be fair about that if farm workers are being brutalized in that way?
Entonces hay ahorita mucha gente que está preparándose para marchar con nosotros en las calles de Tampa a Lakeland. Lakeland es la sede, la ciudad donde está basado Publix.
And so right now we're preparing to have a big march from Tampa to Lakeland, Florida, which is where Publix has their headquarters.
Van a ser 3 días que ojalá que crean la suficiente presión para forzar a Publix a hacer lo correcto.
And it's going to be 3 days, and hopefully that'll create enough pressure for Publix to do the right thing.
Ahorita mientras hablamos también está de gira en el estado de Florida una recreación de lo que fue el troque, donde los trabajadores eran obligados a quedarse, donde eran amarrados en el último caso de esclavitud.
Right now we also have a traveling museum that's actually a recreation of the truck in which workers were locked and chained and beaten, that those workers themselves who escaped from that case helped to recreate.
Y tiene también varios paneles que explican la historia de la esclavitud en la Florida, antes de la guerra civil y después de la guerra civil.
And it also is accompanied by different exhibits that show the evolution of forced labor in Florida agriculture from before the Civil War through all its different forms throughout history until the current day.
Entonces, si hay gente interesada, eso sería algo importante, porque si Publix o si Giant o cualquier corporación que venga a la mesa firma un acuerdo con la coalición, eso crea un peso mucho más grande en contra de toda la industria agrícola entera.
And so if anybody wants to come to Florida and march with us, you're more than welcome. You're very much invited to come and do that. And each company that we can convince to sign these agreements, whether it's Publix or whether it's Giant, that creates more and more of a market for fairly produced tomatoes and takes away from the market for.
Y en algún momento esto va a llegar al punto donde ninguna compañía agrícola va a poder seguir haciendo los negocios como lo han estado haciendo hasta hoy.
Until it gets to the point that no agricultural company can actually continue to treat workers the way that they do today.
What's being done with regards to the failings of the SAFE program? Because the letter calls it a discredited agriculture aid. Like what's being done on that front? Because that seems like that'd be pretty viable. But to strengthen that would seem to work. What's being done on that front?
Safe.
Okay. SAFE era algo que fue creado, se llama Socially Accountable Farm Employees. Y lo que es básicamente los rancheros con las corporaciones que no quieren hacer lo correcto, diciendo que tienen un programa para garantizar que los trabajadores son tratados dignamente.
So SAFE, which stands for Socially Accountable Farm Employers, was a program that was created by the Florida tomato industry in response to our campaign, basically as a public relations effort to make it look like they were cleaning up their act.
Y SAFE estaba diciendo que había certificado a básicamente todos los rancheros de la Florida y que no había encontrado básicamente abusos, los abusos que la coalición decía, y que no se encontró tampoco esclavitud.
So SAFE actually then certified pretty much every single tomato farm in Florida and said that they found no abuses. None of the abuses that we were talking about existed out there. And they actually declared these SAFE certified farms to be free of slavery.
Y en ese mismo tiempo, un poquito después, sale este último caso. Y sale que está conectado con compañías que están supuestamente cubiertas bajo SAFE.
And actually just a few days later was when the workers who had been locked in this truck escaped out of that truck. And pretty much proved that SAFE hadn't really certified anything because they were working on a SAFE certified farm.
De hecho, en ese tiempo estaba la campaña en contra de Burger King. Y Burger King estaba básicamente haciendo parte también de esas declaraciones.
And this was during the time when we had our campaign focused on Burger King, and Burger King had been sort of hiding behind SAFE by saying that they purchased from SAFE certified growers.
Y mientras estaban dando su declaración sobre esto de que no existe esclavitud, todo está bien, al mismo tiempo trabajadores estaban como a 3 bloques o 4 bloques de distancia escapándose, habían escapado de este troque para contar el infierno que les tocó vivir.
And actually, ironically, Burger King and the SAFE representatives came to Immokalee to declare that their supply chain was slavery-free and free of abuses the very same day that the first workers punched their way through the ventilation hatch of that truck. So it couldn't have been more perfectly timed.
Dios tiene un sentido del humor.
Yeah, we often say that God has a very strong sense of humor. But just so you know, with SAFE, like they're in terms of what to do about it, like they aren't, like it doesn't actually exist. Like I've even called the number, and like it's the office of the Florida Tomato Association, and they don't even know what it is to call. So it's basically like they created this PR thing, but it doesn't actually, like there's really nothing there.
It's just
So,
there's no like accountability or
yeah,
anything
there's
like that.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's basically they're saying there's no abuses.
Están las corporaciones y algunos de los rancheros están diciendo, tenemos un caballo muerto para jugar las carreras.
Yeah, the tomato growers are basically trying to pretend that they are taking a dead horse to rights or something. You know, there's nothing there, and it's interesting though because I actually called them and they didn't even know when you call the office, some supposed phone number, the person was like, we don't even know what that is. So it's just sort of, but companies often, it's a response, and what it shows is that the agriculture industry is feeling pressure to change conditions, and so the first step is acknowledging that, something has to change as they're saying, oh, we're doing it, but the second step is then actually doing it. And that's what the CRW's Code of Conduct is all about.
About 30 years ago, Edward R. Murrow made the documentary Harvest of Shame, which highlighted the miserable conditions among American farm workers. And the conditions were miserable partly because the National Labor Relations Act denied the ability to unionize. I know about 5 years ago, on the 25th anniversary, another documentary with a similar title was made, saying that the same thing, the same abuses exist now. Things aren't very much better. Why isn't the National Labor Relations Act modified? Why can Cesar Chavez in California and others call their leaders, their organization, the National Farm Workers Union? In what sense is that a union? Why can't you have a union in the same sense? Why doesn't federal law now allow you to have a union?
Hay varias razones. Una de ellas es que esta ley de tener sindicato en California pasó como una ley del Estado.
So there's a few different reasons for each part of that. The first is as a result of the struggles of Cesar Chavez, California passed a statewide right to organize law that allowed them to form unions there.
Pero el ambiente, el tiempo en el que pasó y también todas las personas que vivían en California, la mayoría son personas que tenían conexión con México, muchos son de México, era diferente, como dicen en inglés, el landscape.
Yeah, the political landscape in California, for instance, is very different than the political landscape in a state like Florida.
En la Florida estamos hablando de un estado que históricamente, básicamente ha sido uno de los que da dinero para las campañas de muchos de los políticos y representantes.
And the Florida agricultural industry is also a very, very large political contributor to many different politicians.
Y geográficamente estamos en el sur y parece que históricamente cuando se trata de agricultura todavía estamos en el sur.
And we are geographically located in the south, and when it comes to agriculture, we're very contextually located in the south as well in terms of how people think about treating farm workers.
Entonces, hemos visto que la manera más efectiva de lograr un cambio concreto y sistemático es trayendo a los compradores grandes a hacer lo correcto.
And we've seen that the most effective and structural way to actually eliminate a lot of these root causes of abuses is to go at the level of the market.
Porque ahorita, por ejemplo, hay leyes, hay la ley del sueldo mínimo, que no significa nada dentro de la industria agrícola.
Just for instance, even the laws that do exist, for instance, there's a minimum wage law that supposedly applies to farm workers.
Y no se respeta, es constantemente pisoteado.
But it's not respected, it's stepped on every day.
Y muchas otras leyes que existen en los libros, en teoría.
And lots of laws that are on the books are just theory.
Pero con los códigos de conducta, si no se respetan las leyes existentes, más los derechos nuevos que existen bajo estos acuerdos, entonces hay un riesgo de una consecuencia de mercado.
But with the code of conduct, we're actually putting enforcement into that, and when it's violated, there's actually market consequences for abuses, and so that's generating much faster changes.
A lo mejor en el futuro eso cambia, no sabemos.
So maybe in the future, things will change, you never know.
Pero ahorita no es nuestra meta.
But right now, our focus isn't on that law. And one thing I would add is, even if farm workers in Florida, even if that law were changed and farm workers had the right to organize, the way the food industry is set up, if you were to be organizing a union, that'd be with the tomato growers. And your idea would be to negotiate a wage increase with the tomato growers. Well, if the tomato growers don't have the economic wherewithal to pay a wage increase to their farm workers without going out of business, that can't happen. And so structurally, the issue is not just with the tomato growers, but it's with the companies that pushed and pushed and pushed. And just to give you a sense of how much the large volume has changed the tomato industry, a few decades ago, it was mostly supermarkets and restaurants were mom and pop stores, right? And so they would buy a few tomatoes, and you bought it at a cost, what the people wanted to charge you for it. Well, today there are all these huge companies, and so they've really pushed the price down to the point that Even in 1990, tomato growers still received 41 cents on every dollar, every retail dollar of tomatoes. In 2000, tomato growers received 24 cents on every dollar. And so that shift is exactly what we're going after here. The tomato industry is really being pushed into a corner to produce these tomatoes that are so cheap because companies want to sell them, although they don't even sell them that cheap, but they want to get them cheap to have that profit. And so that's why they have to be involved in rectifying that.